Hi there, welcome back to Lorena's Labyrinth. Today, this is the third video in the series that I'm doing on emotional intelligence as part of helping you to raise your own self-awareness and your levels of emotional consciousness, basically because clearly it's going to lead to better outcomes for everybody. Now, just to outline here as well that the content that I put up here in regard to mental health is designed to meet the approval of the World Health Organization. So I just want to articulate, of course, that doesn't include spiritual references like chakras and the fact that I draw upon angelic healing or whatever. That, of course, is my personal stuff. But the rest of this stuff is mainstream through mental health organizational training. The idea is that by doing this series of videos, it helps to build emotional resilience by understanding your feelings. Well, that would be good. Feelings. And we will explore in future videos things like our attitudes, thoughts, and beliefs and how they can impact on our emotional state. But mainly, actually, I'll just give you a new word for your vocabulary. Flawed thinking styles are in the mental health industry referred to as maladaptive cognition. So we'll be unpacking that in future videos, but you might want to start exploring that yourself at the moment if you're looking to really empower yourself. But otherwise, this content here, I think feelings is a good place to start. Just giving you the thumbs up as well that the content that I put up is actually based on my training. So this is where the disclaimer comes in that I'm not currently registered to deliver mental health services. I no longer am registered with my professional body, and as part of good professional practice, we're obligated to make sure that the information that we provide is current, which is research evidence based within the last 5 years. So for those reasons, the information that I provide to you is not necessarily current. So if you find a topic interesting, then by all means get out there and really do your own research on whatever I put up, because it may have changed, and it may have changed and become better, or it may have had more evidence done and been disproven as being beneficial, since I learned it. So that's just for your information. Now, the other thing is too, from time to time, I might make references to resources that are available for people to access. I don't get paid, just so you know that. It's not a funded channel, and I don't actually promote anything because I'm getting money out of it. If I promote something, it's because I'm aware I have seen benefits for people in certain situations. And of course, it's not one size fits all. So any recommendations I make, they're just based on my personal opinion. It doesn't mean that it's going to work for you or anybody else. But without further ado, we'll go and we'll recap what we've talked about on the previous videos just briefly, and then we'll get into the whole context of naming emotions and building our emotional literacy, for want of a better description. So just quickly, we'll do a recap on what emotional intelligence is. And we did discuss this obviously in part 1 of the series. It is the way that we perceive emotions, our feelings, and this includes the sensations that we have that are associated with those emotions, so that we can interpret them before they become out of control. And how we interpret our emotions is, what do we mean by them? When we say that we're angry, does that mean that we're furious, or does it mean that we're just frustrated? This is prime examples of it. And how much control do we actually have over our emotions? People can see, or can people see clearly what we're feeling when we're feeling emotional? Does, for example, we use anger, show on our face or in our posture, in our body language? What do we say and do when we're experiencing each emotion? And in what way, if at all, do our emotions impede on our relationships? Are we able to control them? Can we evaluate them? How important are they? And how effectively can we communicate and articulate our emotions and feelings to other people around us? And by that I mean at least verbally express in a mature way. So emotional intelligence is the ability to listen to and respond to our feelings in a timely way. So, just to recap again, emotional intelligence and literacy evidentially leads to greater opportunities that bring happiness and joy into our lives. People with a higher emotional intelligence are more attractive to employers, and while money is not everything, it's certainly an important factor in how we're able to enjoy our life. So, it's far more pleasant, we all know, to have a flushing toilet than it is to have a long drop, certainly in my experience. I also enjoy a hot shower as opposed to a cold one, and a nice soak in a tub every now and again, and all of these things cost money. Anyway, beyond the physical benefits, we experience better relationships, heightened self-respect, and have a think really for a time when you were angry and you said something that you didn't mean. There becomes this tendency to beat yourself up afterwards, especially if it hurt a loved one very badly and ended up resulting in the termination, if you like, or the ending of a relationship, simply because you weren't able to control your reactions. So when we can control our behaviours and words, and we're able to interact with other people with care and regard, especially towards our loved ones, then they will also benefit from this self-management of emotions, and you benefit. So everyone gets to experience greater happiness. Now, obviously, humans are hardwired for social connection, and I know that there are people that are out there that like their own space. Having said that, generally in my experience, it's because they haven't found someone that they can share values with or that they can enjoy their space with. But I believe that they are open to sharing the space if they can find that solid connection and have healthy relationships. Feel free to correct me. So, with today's video, we're exploring the first parts of self regulation, which is that capacity to feel the emotion and to pause and reflect, which of course then leads on to controlling and evaluation. So, basically, before I go any further, just a reminder that when we're becoming self aware or emotionally aware, we have to understand what each emotion feels like. For an early intervention, if you like, because most people tend to not pay attention to what they're actually feeling until it's become bigger than Ben-Hur. And then the other problem is that most people actually can't express the name or the nature of the feeling or emotion that they're having. So this is what we're going to be doing today. So this is the content that I learned while I was at university, that there are three types of emotions, and no, they're not called happy, sad and mad, or sad, mad and glad. It's been identified that part of the problem, as I said, for teenagers and even young adults, and I would go further and say older adults, that in regard to their interactions and how they relate to others, is this inability to express their emotions, let alone understand them. So what I've observed when I was doing my prep for this video is that there's a lot of content out there that's directed at young people and children, because in Australia, as part of, I've got to use censorship here for YouTube purposes, the big S word, the final ending, when people are so bound up by their emotions and they don't know where to go and they end up feeling hopeless, they take this final step. Well, I was initially trained in this as part of a youth intervention to address these problems. And anyway, where I'm going with this is a lot of the resources that you see online are directed to young people, because certainly within Australia, they've identified as part of this intervention that the quicker we can make young people aware and emotionally literate, the better chances are to avoid these kind of really long-term negative situations. So what I've been trying to do here, or what I'm aiming to do here, is to give you access to some adult ones that respects your intelligence, because we're not all children. And I think it's fairly patronising for adults to have to attend courses in this kind of stuff and be treated like they're a 5 or 6 year old. So anyway, going back to the types of emotions, what we learn at university is that there is three types. They are the primary emotions, the secondary emotions, and the tertiary emotions. Now, of course, I'm using academic language here, but this is all part of intellectual as well as emotional intelligence. So this particular slide is directed at people to inform you just of a little bit of extra stuff just for your own benefit. And if you decide to seek professional help, you'll have a bit of an idea about where to direct yourself and who might best support your needs, because you will establish through this process what kind of processor you are. And that's all part of self-awareness as well. So what I've seen online is that there are people that call themselves coaches, or life coaches, and they express that thought precedes feelings. Now, once again, this is a gap in their own education, because certainly when I was at university, we had to look at the research and the evidence, because we can't make statements in an academic setting unless we can back it up with reference material. So anyway, the bottom line is, during my studies, and I had to do components on psychology, was that there is actually, the jury is out. Nobody knows if it's the thought comes first or the feelings come first. What they know is that when we're talking about the way people process, they're either referred to as top-down processes or bottom-up processes. Now, a top-down person, or somebody who is said to be a top-down processor, they recognize that they think a thought like, "Oh, that's bad," and then they have an emotional reaction. They might be sad, right? Whereas a bottom-up processor tends to think, I feel sad and I don't know why. And then they work out why they feel the way they do. So for them, they're referred to as bottom-up processes. They feel it, then they establish the thought. Now, this is why different treatment methods will work for some people in some situations and not for other people in different situations. And I've put it down here, or I've put it up here on the slides, that people who are top-down processors definitely will benefit from any of the cognitive behavioural therapies. Now, that's also called CBT. It's in a wide variety of formats now. It was formed ages ago. I'm not going to give you a big lecture on it all, but basically that works very well with a lot of people who have got what we called flawed thinking processing, or actually, I will do a presentation at some point on what is referred to as maladaptive thinking styles. And of course, I'm using academic language here. Basically, if we were going to simplify it, we'd say that they've got limiting thoughts that create negative consequences in their life, for want of a better word. Now, people that are bottom-up processors, and they can become offended quite, in fact, they're very sensitive to having people who are behavioural or cognitive therapists turning around and trying to work with them. This is just based on my experience and my training and understanding, and speaking with people with conditions such as borderline personality disorder, or any of the personality disorders actually. They get offended because I think, and I'm making an assumption here that's not substantiated with evidence, that they're probably more the bottom-up processes. So they feel it and then they unpack the thought. So for them to have somebody turn around and say to them that their pain, because if we're talking about emotional pain, is a product of their thinking or their wiring in their brain, they tend to take that very personally. So the cognitive behavioural therapies don't tend to be particularly effective for bottom-up processes, but what they call dialectical behavioural therapies are. Now, I will, although they get a little bit of, I'm not going to get into the politics of it actually, there are some people that in these professions, psychiatric professions or whatever, that will poo-poo dialectical. Now, dialectical is also called DBT, by the way. They'll poo-poo that. But the people that I am aware of that have got the personality disorders and in recovery, they actually love this as a treatment. Most of them find it to be very effective. So I will give some resources to this at the end of the slide. And oops, my mistake. When I said I would give resources at the end of the slide, I meant at the end of the video. And I just want to flick back to that for a moment without showing you the screen to say that DBT is actually believed to be very effective with people with all kinds of emotional dysregulation was the word that I was looking at. And this is where they become overwhelmed by emotions and they don't know how to release them. So anybody that struggles with emotional overload and heightened sensitivity, there will most likely, I would say definitely, but that's probably a bias, benefit from DBT. Anyway, to keep things fairly simple, if a person is unable to express themselves, then that's going to have impact on their relationships, because people have to be able to work around, if you're trying to have a healthy relationship, you've got to have that open communication, and it's part of understanding. So the importance of this I've tried to articulate here. If we use the words in the very simple version of, like when we're a 5 or 6 year old, I'm really angry with you. People, well, there's a number of problems with that statement anyway, but in the first instance, the person that you're saying it to is probably going to go into high alert. If you go and check out the neuroscience videos, immediately they're going to be on edge. Red flag is up. They're thinking, uh-oh, what does this mean? Does that mean they're just a little bit irritable? Does that mean I'm at risk of a smack in the head? Am I safe in this environment? How angry are we talking? Are we talking a little bit, or are we talking a lot? Are we talking about the fact that I need to start running for the hills? So we need to be able to effectively express to a person just exactly where we're at, where our emotions as well. So I've put this slide together to demonstrate that once again there are variations of what is referred to as professional opinion when it comes to explaining the emotions, especially the primary emotions. Now, as the name suggests, primary emotions are the first emotions that are felt when something happens, when a person gets triggered. So as per the previous slide of I'm angry, or if you've just got some really good news like you won a competition, you're happy or you're excited, and then other times something might happen that makes you sad. So hence the simple explanation for children, which is that happy, sad, and mad. The primary emotions are the body's first response to whatever has just happened. So it's a sensory thing usually, and you can feel it through your body. They're usually very strong emotions, and they are thought to be instinctive or primal based on our animal nature. And as said, they can be really very sensitive, actually. So what else can I add to this? They're reflective of the situations, and these primary actions in the first instance will create a desire for us to act in a certain way. This is before we think about the emotion or analyze them. And we can usually, if it's a primary first reaction, we can follow that habitual pathway of behaviour based upon what those feelings are. So in many ways, that saying that time heals is because over time the initial primary reaction or primary emotion fades. It loses some of that strength and passion of the initial trigger. So I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing the guy's name right, but Robert Plutchik identified that there are 8 primary emotions. This was his opinion, and he grouped them into pairs. So you can see them on the other side that his pairs are what are called polar opposites. You've got joy and sadness, anger and fear, trust and disgust, and surprise and anticipation. He also developed what is called the feelings wheel as part of helping people to process and unpack their emotions. And within this wheel, it actually shows you his view of what are the secondary emotions and tertiary emotions as well. And once again, he says that they're instinctive and natural, that they're functional, they can be painful or pleasurable, they can be harmful when we act upon them if we haven't processed our reactions. They're very sensitive and they're vulnerable, and they're rooted in the deepest parts of our brain. So this can be I guess this is where we talk about awareness and consciousness, because if these emotions and vulnerabilities are really down deep, they're below the subconscious, and it takes an event that brings them to the surface. And this is where they become messengers. So when it comes to the surface, it's an opportunity to unpack, why do I feel that way, especially when people don't understand their emotions. Anyway, I'm going to put a link to this wheel in the video description rather than put it up here. It's a great tool, and from my perspective, it provides lots of information as part of increasing this self-awareness that obviously we're all striving, well, I'd like to think we're all striving to achieve, certainly if we're watching this video. So Paul Ekman, he expanded on this a little further, but he doesn't pair them up with the polar opposites. He just basically said, actually, look, it's quite involved. You could really go and do a lot of research on their papers and that kind of stuff if you were so inclined. But basically, Ekman says that emotions are innate and they're shared across all cultures. So it doesn't matter what country you're from, what your nationality is, whatever, everybody is going to experience these primary and very basic emotions, and that's obviously because they are part of what some people refer to as the animal nature. He later expanded this list, by the way, to include emotions such as pride, shame, embarrassment, and excitement. But for today, what I'm going to look at is what Parrot has put up in 2001. And this is because it's a fairly easy to use list, and you can obtain this online as well. But it just makes it easier to break it down and show you what primary and secondary emotions are, and tertiary, of course. So I've kind of covered this already in the previous slides, but I've got some visuals here to reiterate it. I do like to keep things fairly simple. And so just to remind you that we talked about the fact that there is a division with online psychology, and I use quotation mark experts because there's a lot of people up there that actually aren't qualified psychologists. They might be calling themselves life coaches or whatever. And just so you know, within industry, these people are actually referred to as pop psychologists. They've got a little bit of information, but they're not fully informed. So a prime example of this is when somebody turns around and says that, the thought precedes the feeling. Okay, well, that's actually not true. If they're trained in it and they understand it, then they know, yes, people can be top-down processors or they can be bottom-up. But whether they're a bottom-up processor or a top-down processor, the important things is that the primary reaction or the primary emotion is instinctive, it's natural, it's functional, as in it serves a purpose, and they can be painful or pleasurable. The reason they can be harmful, of course, is that when we react out of pain, obviously they refer to the deepest parts of our sensitivities and vulnerabilities, usually in the subconscious. But the primary emotions I've got on here, they help keep us connected with others. Well, the thing is too, they can do, but if we're coming from a space of anger and volatility, if you like, or where the emotions are a roller coaster, they can actually create a disconnect between ourselves and others. But they certainly will guide our actions, especially if we can harness them and direct them in positive ways. So there's also professional debate about how exactly secondary emotions occur or how they're experienced by the individual, but there is an agreement on what they actually are. So I always use the quotation marks when I say words like experts, all right? But some experts state that they follow the primary reaction, that first emotional response. And if we use the example of a boss walking to the office and giving a person a death stare to one of the staff members who actually was busy working, wasn't expecting it, didn't know what it's about, their primary action or primary emotion to the death stare will probably be shock or surprise. And then there will potentially be that desire to react to the death stare, which could be a defensive get up and like, what are you looking at me like that for? What did I do to you? Might be the traits of the person who doesn't have a lot of emotional intelligence, whereas somebody who's a little bit more along the pathway or trajectory of developing emotional maturity will be thinking to themselves, I want to get to the bottom of this. Why are they looking at me like this? They might feel all that defensiveness, but they're able to regulate it and control it and take the time out to actually ask the boss, is there something wrong? I'm just wondering, are you okay? You know what I mean? Things like that to find out what is behind the death stare. And that's probably wiser anyway, because the bottom line is that the boss might turn around and say, did I? I didn't even realise I did it. I've had a dreadful morning, got a ticket on the way to work, things like that. And I'm sorry, So this is what the secondary emotions are that then determine the actions part of it, okay? But there's more to it. I would say it's probably a little bit more like the chicken and the egg scenario. I don't think that all secondary emotions follow the primary reaction, but at the same time, I do think there is a logic to how this has been demonstrated. And the reason I think this is because I actually already am aware that I'm what is called a bottom-up processor. I have the feelings first, and then I have to unpack them. So if I pay attention to my physical reactions, I can tell when I am uncomfortable, but I might not know why. But I guess that's where I would also say that they're my early messengers as well, because if I feel these levels of discomfort, then I start asking myself, what's this about? So at that point in time, it's not that I'm angry, it's that I am uncomfortable. It's not that I'm happy, it's not that I'm sad. I'm not having a full-blown emotion. I'm just aware that there is a change in my comfort levels, and then I'm able to explore it a bit further, and then I go back to the thought. So I unpack the other way. This is why I say I'm not really fixated on how people say that secondary emotions occur. I think it's complex and I think it's different for each individual, but this is all part of developing self-awareness, is recognizing in the first instance, are you a top-down processor or are you a bottom-up? Do you feel and then think, or do you have a thought and then feel? This is all part of identifying sensitivities. So, from a generalist perspective, as you work this out, there is still some relevance in the content I'm going to give you here, which is that um, these secondary emotions can be things such as guilt or shame, resentment, frustration, remorse, etc. Right? And these are often learned in childhood from parents or those people on the peripherals of our lives. So there are some people, when I say people, I mean those experts in quotation marks, who state that the purpose of a secondary emotion is to cover up those vulnerable primary reactions. Well, I would say, yeah, sometimes, but other times they're actually those early messengers that I talked about. These same people would also say that they're often harder to name than the primary emotions, because they saturate the primary emotion with a whole heap of complex potential reactions, but they most definitely will influence the behaviour, and they can potentially increase the intensity of your reactions, and they can last much longer than the primary emotions. So we can look at that in a little while. Basically, they say that the secondary emotion is a way, or an internal mechanism of protecting the self from having those vulnerabilities exploited. Now, if you think back, if you've seen the videos that I've loaded on the anatomy of distress, you'll be recognizing here that the emotions, when they're destructive, that's when we're locked in that brainstem aspect of emotional processing. So what we're trying to do here with the secondary emotions is actually to bring our rationale back in, to get out of that initial primary reaction, which is in the brainstem, and bring it to the front, into the frontal lobe, if that makes sense. If you haven't seen them, go and have a watch. You can always pause the videos and come back if it's too long. So just a reminder, when we take a look at the secondary emotions, as you can see here, it's quite an extensive list, and this is why we call emotional intelligence about having a level of emotional literacy. You can see here the number of labels, and we'll unpack this in a minute. But the bottom line is this is based on Parrot's content that he delivered. But if you look at Plutchik's wheel, he's actually got these labels and different ones as well. So it would be about, I guess, in the first instance, just trying to keep things simple, because this will expand your understanding and knowledge anyway. But the idea with understanding our emotions is actually to understand what it feels like to have these emotions. So let's start with love as the easiest one, I guess, for us to break it down. So, from the love perspective, as secondary emotions, we all, I guess, we can articulate and express love is a very pleasurable feeling. And yes, when we love somebody, we can actually, if we take that time out to just sit there and reflect and breathe and do the what does love feel like, it's like, number one, obviously, there's different forms of love. When we talk about intimate partner or children, paternal, maternal, sibling love, and all the rest of it. So we can actually sit there and break down what each form of love feels like for us based on the sensations in our body. So I'm just going to put it out there that if I was at uni and studying this in my counselling session, we would actually have this as a group activity where we would be exploring it and talking to other people about, well, what does it feel like for them? So you might want to have a chat with your mates about this and say, well, I define love. When I feel love, I get a warm, fuzzy sensation in my heart, might be one thing. Another person might just say, well, actually, when I think about how I love my husband, I get warm tingles in my heart area. And, because obviously it's associated with lust, you might have lust also as a secondary emotion towards your intimate partner. So you might get tinglings, obviously, in the areas of your genitals or whatever. If there is an estrangement perhaps from somebody that you love or have loved, then there might be a longing for a reconnection with them. And what does that feel like? Is that a painful feeling in the chest? Because it can be, if there's an estrangement, that can come with pain. It's still love, but it's a secondary emotion. So it's a matter of identifying where this sits physically in your body. And this is where mindfulness activities are very good. So just putting that one out there as the first one being an easy way to define. When we look at some of the other ones, as an example, if we look at the primary emotion of anger, most people would probably be able to say, well, I know what irritation is because it's when I start gritting my teeth or whatever. So these are the other things that you would be looking at and exploring when it comes to emotional literacy. But what exactly does exasperation mean? How do you define that? Because we are talking about naming our emotions as well and applying that sensory perspective to each emotion. So for you within your own activities, because I'm not going to unpack all of these because it will just be bigger than Ben-Hur, but this is something that you could do in your own time. And what you could do is use Google, right? Or check an online dictionary and go, well, how do they define this particular emotion? And then sit with that explanation for a minute and then do some breathing and some mindfulness and go, okay, well, who is somebody that I might be exasperated by? It could be a work colleague, actually, or it could be a child even. It could be an adult child. Think of somebody who frustrates you and makes you angry, as that primary reaction. Where does that anger come from and what is that secondary emotion? Now, the other thing too is that when we have a primary emotion, say, of sadness, that can be a secondary emotion as well. This is why I say there's all sorts of variables here, right? Because if we look at this list here, it says that shame is a primary emotion of sadness, but quite often we might get angry in the first instance and react to that, and then we have that shame. And of course, that shame is associated with the primary emotion of sadness. So then you could turn around and say, well, yeah, I feel really sad because I said X and Y and now I feel bad. If we want to break it down into kiddie language, I was initially angry, but now I'm just sad because I got mad. So yeah, you could have a primary emotion of anger or rage that then turns into the primary emotion of sadness, but is actually shame. Neglect is an interesting one. When I first looked at it, I sort of thought, well, I'm not sure how neglect sits really as being an emotion. But when I look at it and looked up the meaning of neglect, it says that place that has a hopeless air of neglect. And I would say that it doesn't really sit with me as a secondary emotion. That's my perspective, okay? Everybody's different, but this is part of establishing your own emotional literacy. So now let's take a look at what tertiary emotions are and what they mean. So tertiary emotions, they're experienced as a consequence usually of having a secondary emotion. So I was unable to find a clear description, just in the course of putting this video together, and I'm speeding things up now, for the purposes of this video. So what I'm going to do is explain them as a means of identifying the depth of an emotion and to get clarification around a feeling. Okay, so for instance, when we say the word love, we can use it multidimensionally. Oh, I just love spaghetti, or I love that person, when actually we don't. It's not a good descriptive word a lot of the time. Plus, we might love a person, but as I explained before, there's different types of love. The way we love our child might be different to the way we love our pet. I mean, if we don't have children, we might love our pet like a child. Okay, so the lists go on, and it does become a lot more complex. So this is why I am not going to go into the whole business of defining and explaining each particular emotion, especially from a tertiary perspective, okay? Because the descriptors here are quite extensive. And when we look at the descriptors of neglect as a secondary emotion, then we actually see, actually, yes, it is an emotional sensation. It is a feeling because, so if I say that I'm a bottom-up processor, these are the things that I will feel at a sensory level before I identify what the secondary emotion is, because I'm that bottom-up processor. The top-down processors will feel the primary emotion first, unpack it and bring it down, if that makes sense. I think it's probably looking a bit more clearer to you. Anyway, if you unpack this and talk about it as a feeling, you will know, for instance, with sadness, that when we feel pity and sympathetic towards a person, that does not feel the same within our body as what guilt, shame, regret, and remorse feel. They're all forms of sadness, but they don't carry the same physical sensations and the same feelings. And in the same way that depression does not feel the same as embarrassment. You know what it feels like to be embarrassed. Everybody does. I think they can define that easily. They can define perhaps alienation, isolation, and all the rest of it. But would they, before they looked at this activity, define those emotions as being neglect? And would they actually recognize, before they looked at the tertiary emotions, that neglect is a form of sadness, and that actually there's an internal sadness there, that if people take some activities or some actions on this tertiary level, that they can actually transform that sadness into happiness. They can go and form social connection. They can do some self-care. If they're homesick, they can reconnect with people from their home. If they're dejected and feeling downfall, and you know what I mean? There's all sorts of things that people can do. So for me, this is the benefit of tertiary in sadness, in the description of sadness, shall we say. And this is where we talk about emotions being messengers. They, if we learn to pay attention to our feelings, and if that means starting through mindfulness techniques and becoming sensitive to the body's sensations and responses, we can unpack this. You know what I mean? We can really grow from this. So anyway, I've done a separate slide for each of the secondary emotions, and I'm just going to glance over them to give you an idea, because you can use this video as a tool and look at these descriptors at some point in time without me talking to them. You can just fast forward. I'll put some links, chapters in the video description, so that you can explore this at your own time, at your own pace. You can have a chat with your mates about it. You might want to have a talk and say, well, when I feel guilty, I feel X and Y. I get it in my feet, I get it in my head. I don't know, by the way. I'm not saying this is how it happens. I'm just saying these are the kind of conversations. Well, think of a time that you felt really overwhelmed by guilt. Where did that sit in your body physically, right? And quite often, actually, if you're into the energy and spiritual stuff, once you can unpack these emotions, you will actually find where they sit in your chakras as well. Sorry about that. That's my phone. Whoops. It's also, when we look at the tertiary emotions, that it really helps us to understand exactly what the substance of our feelings are. For instance, looking at love, and when we look at affection, all these different definitions of it, it makes you recognize, just how you feel, even about people that you don't really know, whether or not the way that you view them is loving or unloving. So I can think of a prime example. I don't know that I'll mention which YouTube channel it is, but there is a channel where it's a reaction video and it's a cultural thing, and I'm gaining great enjoyment out of watching it, because I actually do like watching people anyway. It sounds a bit sick, but I don't mean in a bad way. I'm very interested in culture and the way people act, and the way that they act, whether or not they're showing the authenticity of themselves. And what I did was I found a channel, and there is a young man who is on there with his brother. And one of these young men I look at and I just think, I just want to wrap that boy up. I'd be happy to adopt him as my own son. He is just so gorgeous. Of course, I don't know him from a bar of soap. I only see the persona that is carried across on clearly social media platforms. But the fact of the matter is that the way I perceive this young man is that he is completely transparent and authentic in the way he communicates and his responses to videos, because a lot of his reactions are on cultural type things. And in fact, actually, it's not just him. There's actually another cultural reaction type video by a group in India. And there's certain people I look at and I think they just shine. They just have this inner beauty that even if you don't know them, it stirs something within the old heart chakra, shall we say. And when I was looking at this breakdown of tertiary emotions, for example, I thought, you know what? Actually, if I was to look at all of these, because I believe these people shine, which is the best way that I can think to describe them. They've got this soft, gentle persona, and you can see that they're quietly spoken, they're sincere, they're very caring within their whole manner. So this is probably what I resonate to. The feeling that I have when one's an old man, obviously an old spiritual man in an Indian village. And then there's another lady, of course, she's an older spiritual lady. And then within the context of the two young men, he is a spiritual man. So they shine their spiritual beauty, their connection, if you like, they wear it as part of their persona, and they're authentic and honest with who they are. They don't try and hide it because obviously they're comfortable. And what I recognized was, of course, the emotion that they raise within me when I watch them is not one of affection. I don't think I would say it was love, because I think love is something that's got to be demonstrated based on facts of reality, knowing the person. I think it's love is something that you develop. A fondness, for me, I think fondness is something also that you develop from being around a person. Like I'm fond about the ladies' children next door because I have seen them since they were babies grow and develop, So there's a liking and a caring there. There's not an attraction, because for me that tends to infer that there might be an energetic or a sexual attraction towards them. Tenderness, I think, is an emotion that indicates connection for me. I mean, it's different for everybody. Compassion, I sort of think, is that empathetic care for people, and sentimentality has got a memory associated to it. This is just how I interpret these without really getting in there and unpacking them. So then I sort of think, well, because I actually feel when I watch these guys talking and how they behave, I recognize that actually, surprisingly, what I feel towards them on a sensory level, this is within my body, is a form of adoration, because I am seeing the divine in them, or the substance of who they are, which I guess I equate with a level of godliness, because clearly I'm a bit spiritual, more than a bit. But I recognize that within them, and I think it's beautiful about them. So for me, I guess I've worked out today by looking at this that actually the sensation that arises in me towards watching these three people is a level of adoration towards them, right? Which some people might define as the namaste. I see the soul within, I see the spark within you, I see the divine spark within you. And of course, that comes back to this love factor. We go back from adoration to affection to love, because I'm recognizing divine love, I guess, within these people. So taking it down a spiritual level. But for other people, it will be different things. So the point I'm making is, we can actually get back to root cause by looking at the tertiary emotions. So that's the bottom-up processing aspect that actually is how I work. You, of course, might be differently or process differently. So as you can see, there's a lot to unpack with joy, and this is why I think I probably lend or lean towards being this bottom-up processor, because I feel that once you explore the actual meanings of these words, it's easier to identify what emotion it is that you're experiencing at any given time. This is as the messenger for an early intervention. Anyway, I'm going to leave this one to you to unpack yourself, especially things like cheerfulness. What is cheerfulness? There's a lot there. Zest is an interesting little emotion as well, for you to work out how you feel about that one. Same with enthrallment. Anyway, I shall leave you to this one. Oh, I need to hurry up. This video is getting very long. Okay, when we look at the primary emotion of surprise, secondary emotion of surprise, that just becomes very confusing. When we look at the tertiary emotions, then you look at that and you think, well, what's the difference between amazement and astonishment? I suggest you use your dictionary because it's not very clear either, but they are different. So you would look at it, how do you use these words in your own life? You see somebody do something, you go, oh my goodness me, that's amazing, right? But then if we're talking about astonishment, I guess that I could explain astonishment as to, sorry, I hope people aren't arachnophobic here. I was actually astonished at a time when I was sitting on my back veranda, I was living in the bush, and I saw this, what I thought was a fluffy orange pom-pom walking towards me. And I thought, what's that? So, as any curious person will do, I got down on my hands and knees and just about put my nose up against the pom-pom before I realised that the pom-pom was actually wriggling. And what it was actually a wolf spider, which is not harmful, by the way, but it was carrying all of its babies on its back, and the little orange tufts that I was looking at was actually the legs of the babies moving. So I can honestly say that when I looked at the spider, there was a level of astonishment, and that whole, oh my goodness me, nature is incredible. So it was very surprising. It was astonishing to think how nature works, for example. So when we look at anger, we can see there's a lot to anger. There's a lot of layers involved with it. And I think most of us at least have the capacity to turn around and say, or to know the difference between irritation and rage. I don't think most of us would realize that disgust is actually an angry or an anger-based emotion. Envy and jealousy, we might not have worked that out as being an anger-based emotion as well. But when we unpack each one of these emotions and look at how that feels in our body at a sensory level as well, yeah, sure, then we can identify these are the basis, these are the anger and secondary emotions, and then of course these tertiary ones. I think looking at exasperation and rage are actually really interesting demonstrations of anger. So I'm going to leave that with you to unpack yourself in your own time for the sake of expediting this video. From my perspective, once again, fear becomes another interesting emotion to unpack when we look at it at a tertiary level. I don't know that most people would have realised that these were fear-based reactions. If they unpack things like, look, I think horror, most people wouldn't say, oh, that was horrific, with certain things. But when you break it down, it does make sense. Anxiety and nervousness, I think most people would understand that that's a fear-based reaction. Would they have called it nervousness? I think yes, they would have. I'm going to leave this once again for you to unpack in your own time. And this is because I actually want to introduce you to a couple of resources. First of all, this guy, Dan Siegel, I was introduced to his concepts of name it, tame it. And the theory is basically, when it comes to emotional regulation, if you can name, articulate, and express your emotions, if you've struggled with behavioral issues, or personality disorders or whatever, that you can start to manage your symptoms through naming your emotions, expressing your emotions, and going through this process of emotional intelligence and literacy. Now, at the time I was introduced to it, it was considered to be cutting edge, and I'm well aware that to this day, that when I've interacted with psychologists more recently, last couple of years, within the professional development sector, that this guy is actually quite esteemed and quite prestigious as far as what he can offer people as far as doing the behavioural change, creating behavioural change. And if I'm correct, I believe that he does draw upon neuroscience as part of what he's talking about with cementing change. Now, I also want to say, while I actually have had email conversations with him historically, I'm not being sponsored by him to promote this book, okay? I just am mentioning it as a viable resource because, in my opinion and my experience of providing technique and strategy to people, it's been very effective. And also, I personally, what I have seen and known of the guy is that I actually see him as having a lot of integrity. He is very committed to helping people to become the best versions of themselves. So he's not just a talk it type person. He actually is a walk it, talk it, walk it, learn it kind of thing. I will put up some links for you. One of them is a meditation where he introduces you to a strategy that he uses that's mindfulness. And if I can speak, what I understand is it is basically a taste test if people want to do a workshop. Now, you don't have to go and do that, but it gives you an idea of how to step into the mindfulness practice if that's what you're interested in looking at. I will be putting up some mindfulness strategies over the next weeks as well to help you to raise your own emotional awareness and, as such, raise your own levels of self-awareness, because, of course, this is where we're all aiming to be. So if you are one of the people that calls yourself a healer with energy, what we're talking about with emotions and breaking them down, we're actually looking at orange chakra stuff. Orange being the passion and the primary emotion, I guess. And then we unpack it, rationalize it with the crown chakra, and then ideally we convert it into a loving demonstrations and emotions. That's the idea behind it. Now, for those people that are into angels, Archangel Uriel oversees the orange chakra, and he holds a healing ray to assist with that process. If you don't believe in that stuff, or if you're not into angels, that's fine. Just disregard this video. But some people are, and so this little bit of information is for them. So, my friends, I think that's about all I should give you today, or can give you. It's been a long video as usual. What I'm going to do is let you know next week, as part of following up on this series, I'm going to, rather than do a lecture or whatever we like to call the information I give to you in these type of videos, next week it's actually going to be an activity, and it'll be a mindfulness, so that you can spend some time learning and understanding your own feelings from a physical perspective as well, identifying those early messengers. So that's the plan. So basically, if you like what you hear, if you like the information I'm sharing, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Feel free to share the content with whoever you want to. I'm quite happy about that. If you want to be notified when we upload new content, please do click the bell to be notified. And in the meantime, I shall catch you on the next video. Take care, my friends. Have a blessed day. See you for now. Bye-bye.